Day 1, the first story. Sir Chiappaletto cheats a holy friar by a false confession and dies, and having lived as a very bad man, is, on his death, reputed a saint, and called San Chiappaletto. A seemly thing it is, dearest ladies, that whatever we do, it be begun in the holy and awful name of Him who was the Maker of all. Wherefore, as it falls to me to lead the way in this your enterprise of story-telling, I intend to begin with one of his wondrous works, that, by hearing thereof, our hopes in Him, in whom is no change, may be established, and His name be by us forever lauded. 'Tis manifest that, as things temporal are all doomed to pass and perish, so within and without they abound with trouble and anguish and travail, and are subject to infinite perils. Nor, save for the especial grace of God, should we, whose being is bound up with, and forms part of theirs, have either the strength to endure, or the wisdom to combat their adverse influences. By which grace we are visited and penetrated, so we must believe, not by reason of any merit of our own, but solely out of the fullness of God's own goodness, and in answer to the prayers of those who, being mortal like ourselves, did faithfully observe His ordinances during their lives, and are now become blessed for ever with Him in heaven, to whom, as to advocates taught by experience all that belongs to our frailty, we, not daring, perchance, to present our petitions in the presence of so great a judge, make known our requests for such things as we deem expedient for us. And of His mercy, richly abounding to usward, we have further proof herein, that no keenness of mortal vision being able in any degree to penetrate the secret counsels of the divine mind, it sometimes, perchance, happens that, in error of judgment, we make one our advocate before His Majesty, who is banished from His presence in eternal exile, and yet He, to whom nothing is hidden, having regard rather to the sincerity of our prayers than to our ignorance or the banishment of the intercessor, hears us no less than if the intercessor were in truth one of the blessed who enjoy the light of His countenance, which the story that I am about to relate may serve to make apparent. Apparent, I mean, according to the standard of the judgment of man, not of God. The story goes, then, that Musciato Franzesi, a great and wealthy merchant, being made a knight of France, and being to attend Charles Sanstere, brother of the King of France, when he came into Tuscany at the instance and with the support of Pope Boniface, found his affairs, as often happens to merchants, to be much involved in divers quarters, and neither easily nor suddenly to be adjusted. Wherefore he determined to place them in the hands of commissioners, and found no difficulty except as to certain credits given to some Burgundians, for the recovery of which he doubted whether he could come by a competent agent. For well he knew that the Burgundians were violent men, and ill-conditioned and faithless, nor could he call to mind any man so bad that he could with confidence oppose his guile to theirs. After long pondering the matter, he recollected one Sir Chiapparello da Prado, who much frequented his house in Paris, who, being short of stature and very affected, the French who knew not the meaning of Ciapparello, but supposed that it meant the same as cappello, that is, garland, in their vernacular, called him not Cappello, but Chiappaletto, by reason of his diminutive size. And as Chiappaletto he was known everywhere, whereas few people knew him as Chiapparello. Now Chiappaletto's manner of life was thus. He was by profession a notary, and his pride was to make false documents. He would have made them as often as he was asked, and more readily without fee than another at a great price. Few, indeed, he made that were not false, and great was his shame when they were discovered. False witness he bore, solicited or unsolicited, with boundless delight, and as oaths were in those days had in very great respect in France, he, scrupling not to forswear himself, corruptly carried the day in every case in which he was summoned faithfully to attest the truth. He took inordinate delight, and bestirred himself with great zeal, in fomenting ill-feeling, enmities, dissensions between friends, kinsfolk, and all other folk. And the more calamitous were the consequences, the better he was pleased. Set him on murder, or any other foul crime, and he never hesitated, but went about it with alacrity. He had been known on more than one occasion to inflict wounds or death by preference with his own hands. He was a profuse blasphemer of God and his saints, and that on the most trifling occasions, being of all men the most irascible. He was never seen at church, held all the sacraments vile things, and derided them in language of horrible ribaldry. On the other hand, he resorted readily to the tavern and other places of ill repute, and frequented them. He was as fond of women as a dog is of the stick. In the use against nature, he had not his match among the most abandoned. He would have pilfered and stolen as a matter of conscience as a holy man would make an oblation. Most gluttonous he was, and inordinately fond of his cups, whereby he sometimes brought upon himself both shame and suffering. He was also a practised gamester and thrower of false dice. But why enlarge so much upon him? Enough that he was, perhaps, the worst man that ever was born. The rank and power of Musciato Franzesi had long been this reprobate's mainstay, serving in many instances to secure him considerate treatment on the part of the private persons whom he frequently, and the court which he unremittingly, outraged. So Musciato, having bethought him of this Ser Caparello, with whose way of life he was very well acquainted, judged him to be the very sort of person to cope with the guile of the Burgundians. He therefore sent for him, and thus addressed him: "Sir Chiapelletto, I am, as thou knowest, about to leave this place for good, and among those with whom I have to settle accounts are certain Burgundians, very wily knaves. Nor know I the man whom I could more fitly entrust with the recovery of my money than thyself. Wherefore, as thou hast nothing to do at present, if thou wilt undertake this business, I will procure thee the favour of the court, and give thee a reasonable part of what thou shalt recover." Ser Chiapelletto, being out of employment, and by no means in easy circumstances, and about to lose Musciato, so long his mainstay and support, without the least demur, for in truth he had hardly any choice, made his mind up, and answered that he was ready to go. So the bargain was struck. Armed with the power of attorney and the royal letters commendatory, Ser Chiapelletto took leave of Messer Musciato and hied him to Burgundy, where he was hardly known to a soul. He set about the business which had brought him thither, the recovery of the money, in a manner amicable and considerate, foreign to his nature, as if he were minded to reserve his severity to the last. While thus occupied, he was frequently at the house of two Florentine usurers, who treated him with great distinction out of regard for Messer Musciato, and there it so happened that he fell sick. The two brothers forthwith placed physicians and servants in attendance upon him, and omitted no means meet and apt for the restoration of his health. But all remedies proved unavailing, for being now old, and having led, as the physicians reported, a disorderly life, he went daily from bad to worse, like one stricken with a mortal disease. This greatly disconcerted the two brothers, and one day, hard by the room in which Ser Chiapelletto lay sick, they began to talk about him, saying one to the other, "What shall we do with this man? We are hard bested indeed on his account. If we turn him out of the house, sick as he is, we shall not only incur grave censure, but shall evince a signal want of sense. For folk must know the welcome we gave him in the first instance, the solicitude with which we had him treated and tended since his illness, during which time he could not possibly do aught to displease us, and yet they would see him suddenly turned out of our house, sick unto death. On the other hand, he has been so bad a man that he is sure not to confess or receive any of the Church's sacraments, and dying thus unconfessed, he will be denied burial in church, but will be cast out into some ditch like a dog. Nay, 'twill be all one, if he do confess, for such and so horrible have been his crimes, that no friar or priest either will or can absolve him, and so, dying without absolution, he will still be cast out into the ditch. In which case, the folk of these parts, who reprobate our trade as iniquitous, and revile it all day long, and would fain rob us, will seize their opportunity, and raise a tumult, and make a raid upon our houses, crying, "Away with these Lombard dogs whom the Church excludes from her pale," and will certainly strip us of our goods, and perhaps take our lives also. So that in any case we stand to lose if this man die. Ser Ciappaletto, who, as we said, lay close at hand while they thus spoke, and whose hearing was sharpened, as is often the case, by his malady, overheard all that they said about him. So he called them to him,